So we've just had the keynote for WWDC 2022 and we just saw the launch of the brand new MacBook Air with an M2 chipset and also the brand new MacBook Pro with an M2 chipset inside as well. However, with that MacBook Pro, how does it compare to the last generation MacBook Pro with an M1 chipset? Well, today I'm going to do a specs review comparison for you guys of the MacBook Pro M2 versus the MacBook Pro M1. With that, let's get started. So then I have set up the two MacBooks on the left and the right. So on the left side, we have the brand new MacBook Pro 13-inch M2. And then on the other side, on the right side, we've got the MacBook Pro 13-inch with the M1 chipset. Now, first of all, you're going to notice straight away looking at these pictures, they look identical because they basically are. One of them's got a background of Monterey and one of them's got a background of Big Sur, because at the end of the day, the MacBook Pro 13-inch came out with Big Sur, and basically the M2 MacBook Pro will have Monterey on day one launch. Yes, it will get the latest operating system further on down the line, but right now this is what it will come out with on the box right today. So let's begin then with this comparison. So first of all, let's talk about the actual design, and as you can see, no differences really whatsoever on sort of the keyboard and everything here. In this kind of pictures you can see it looks almost identical. In fact, they are basically identical. So let's talk about the display then. So the display, both of them have an LED IPS technology. So this is the liquid retina sort of display that we have right now, and it's a really good sort of technology that has been used inside the MacBook Pro for a good number of years now. It is not the brand new sort of ProMotion mini LED display that is available right now. It's in the 14 and 16 inch MacBook Pros and also in that 12.9 iPad Pro. It is not that technology. It's the good old-fashioned sort of LED technology that we've been using, and it's really reliable, and it is still really good to use today. The actual screen sizes are identical. They're the 13.3 inches, and we've been having this on MacBooks and MacBook Pros for a long time now, so it's quite sort of a standard display, but you do have the kind of bezels around it. There is no notch on this, so whether you love the notch or you hate the notch, especially if you hate it, you will not be getting one of them on this. And at the end of the day, the likes of say the brand new MacBook Air, what does have a notch, is actually a 13.6 inch display, but it is also just for that notch, so really there isn't many differences here. It's just for that. For screen resolution, it's identical on both these machines. So like I said before, it is a retina display, so it's 2560 by 1600 in its resolution. So as you can see, there are quite a lot of lines on that, and they're both identical for both of these models. And then the pixels per inch, what that equates to, that's 227 pixels per inch, what is quite a lot, and it's a good standard, especially on a 13-inch MacBook Pro. If you did stick it on your lap or on a table near you, you are going to see a really crisp display with this sort of PPI that you have right here. Moving on to the display refresh rate. So the display refresh rate for both of these MacBook Pros is 60 Hz. So basically this is not a ProMotion display like we get in the 14 and the 16-inch MacBook Pros right now, or even say the iPad Pros. We've just got a standard stuck 60 Hz refresh rate. So it will not go up and down in any way. It's just refreshing constantly at that amount for both of these models. Moving on to the brightness though and True Tone. True Tone is identical on both of these machines, and we've had True Tone for a good long time now, but the actual nits in brightness is 500 nits, what is quite strong, quite bright for a small little model like this, and in the price range it's quite a good brightness what we're getting on this. So moving on to the processor and the CPU. So this is basically the biggest change that you're going to see in the new MacBook Pro M2 over the MacBook Pro M1. So with the MacBook Pro M1 with the M1 chipset, the configuration that we've got is an 8-core CPU, and in that 8-core CPU we have 4 efficiency cores and we also have 4 performance cores. Then on top of that as well, we also have 8-core GPU. Now with the M2, things are a bit different. The CPU setup is very similar, so basically we still do have an 8-core CPU with 4 efficiency cores and 4 performance cores, but they are 20% more faster than what was inside the M1. Then on top of this, the GPU has the biggest changes. So instead of an 8-core GPU, we actually now have a 10-core GPU, and this claimed by Apple is about 30 to 35% more powerful than we got inside the Apple M1 chipset. So there is a big sort of power sort of increase definitely for graphics performance, but for processor CPU, it's only around about 20%. We're not going to get massive gains here, but still it's worth noting that there is this change. And in fact, you can see this here in this next shot where we got the Geekbench sort of 5 multi-core score. So right now with the MacBook Pro 13-inch M1, it gives us a Geekbench 5 score of 7,390. Now Apple have claimed that the M2 chipset is 20% more faster in multi-core performance than the M1. So basically, after doing a bit of maths of that 7,390, 20% of that is 1,478. So if we add that together with the 7,390, we get a score of 8,868. So it's going to be around about this sort of Geekbench 5 score. This is not what it's going to be definitely, but it's around this kind of sort of 8,800 sort of figure that we're expecting to see with the brand new MacBook Pro with the M2 chipset inside it. Now for RAM amount, things have changed a little bit as well. So with the MacBook Pro M1, we had a choice of 8GB or 16GB of RAM. What was that? LDDR5 RAM, but we also got that same time of RAM again, what's on board the actual chipset, but this time we have an additional choice of 24GB of RAM with the M2 chipset if you don't want to equip that. But I must warn you that going from 8GB to 24GB, it will cost you $400 more to do this. So yeah, it's quite expensive to make quite a big jump there. Then for storage amounts, they are identical on both the machines. So the MacBook Pro offered us a 13-inch model, offered us 256GB of storage as the baseline, and it went up to 512GB, then 1TB, then 2TB, and it's exactly the same on the MacBook Pro 13-inch with the M2. You go from 256GB all the way up to 2TB. No changes here whatsoever. Then for ports, they're identical again for both of these models. So we've got 2 times USB-C ports, and I must also say they are Thunderbolt 3 ports, but they do have USB 4 connectivity built into them. There's no changes on this whatsoever, whereas the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros actually have Thunderbolt 4. These don't, they're still on Thunderbolt 3, but that's still really quick. For operating system wise, they're both identical what they can run. They can run the latest version of macOS Monterey, what's out right now, and both of them will be getting that brand new macOS operating system Ventura as well later on into the year. For battery life, things actually have changed ever so slightly here. So the MacBook Pro with the M1 chipset actually got a battery life up to 21 hours, but the MacBook Pro 13-inch M2 gets up to 20 hours now. So it's about a 1 hour difference, but really is hardly noticeable whatsoever in kind of battery life, but you are gaining that little bit more performance in the MacBook Pro. So it's a little bit more understanding that this is actually happening. Then for the actual charging wattage, it's exactly the same on both of these MacBook Pros. They're both a 61-watt charger for both of these machines, which was really good to see that Apple retained that. Then for the weight, they're exactly the same. They're 1.4 kilograms. There's no difference here in weight whatsoever on both of these machines. Then moving on to this, we've actually got speakers. Both of them have stereo speakers, but the difference is that the MacBook Pro 13-inch M2 does actually have spatial audio inside it now, whereas the MacBook Pro 13-inch M1 doesn't actually have that. Then moving on to Bluetooth technologies. The Bluetooth technology hasn't changed a bit on both these models. They're both running Bluetooth 5.0, no Bluetooth 5.1 sadly, or anything like that. It's just the same version of Bluetooth 5.0. Then moving on to webcam, it's a little bit of a disappointment to see this, that the actual MacBook Pro 13 M1 came with a 720p camera built in, but then for the M2 to have the exact same camera is quite a bit of a disappointment. Yes, it does have that kind of sort of neural engine built into the M1 and the M2 chipset to enhance the picture, but it would have been really good to get a 1080p camera, especially it's now in the MacBook Air, and we've also got this in the 14 and the 16-inch MacBook Pros, and also most of the iPad lineup has also got this chipset or this camera inside it and the chipset to work with it. So it's really sad that Apple haven't actually changed the webcam in the MacBook Pro M2. Pricing though is exactly the same for both the models. So when the MacBook Pro 13-inch M1 came out, it started at $1,299 US, and that gave you 256 gigabytes of storage and 8 gigabytes of RAM. And you're getting exactly the same for the same price with the MacBook Pro 13-inch M2. It will come with a 256 gigabyte storage as the baseline, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and again it will start at that same price. It's really good to see that. For colours wise though, there are no changes across the board. Both of them have offered silver and space grey. Sadly, there's been no gold MacBook Pro or anything like that, or even that brand new midnight colour being added to the MacBook Pro lineup, so quite disappointing not to see that, but you still do get those two standard colours. So then, with that guys, will you be buying a brand new MacBook Pro? Will you be buying that brand new MacBook Pro M2 model? Or maybe you might be getting yourself a bit of a saver on the M1 model. Or maybe you might be getting yourself a MacBook Air. I would love to know, so let me know in the comments below. So there you have it guys. As you can see, the brand new MacBook Pro with the M2 chipset inside it is basically identical to the last generation. The only main difference is that chipset from basically M1 to M2. So really, if you were looking for a brand new MacBook Pro M1, definitely get the M2 now. Wait out till that comes available and buy that one straight away. But also do consider guys that you do have the brand new MacBook Air as well. And remember, there are some changes there, that you've got a MagSafe connection, and also if you pick the 10-core GPU option on the MacBook Air, it actually ends up the same price as the MacBook Pro M2. Obviously you'll be missing the touch bar, but you gain a slightly larger screen, you get that MagSafe connector, and also if you are charging, you've got the freedom of all those USB-C ports. But do remember that the MacBook Air does have a slightly weaker battery compared to the MacBook Pro, but it's up to you what you want to pick. But based on all of that guys, it's time to wrap up this video. So if you have enjoyed watching it, please do press the like button, and also at the same time, if you want to hear the latest Apple news, reviews and comparisons, please make sure you subscribe to this channel and also hit that notification bell. Until next time guys, I will see you really soon. Bye bye.